Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another recording of MLB Deep Dives with Made the Cut. Today, we're going to be talking about a number of different topics, but the main one, of course, is going to be you're going to give me two Hall of Famers. I'm going to tell you which one I think is better. So, first of all, though, we're going to get through our three different takes when it comes to like our overall discussion of the current MLB landscape. With the first one being, is Francisco Lindor better now with the Mets than he was with the Guardians? What's up, everybody? Welcome in. So, this comes down largely to how you want to perceive his performance relative to the era he was playing in, right? I think that overall he's been better with the Mets. I think that not only has his fielding been about as good as it was with the Guardians, but he's actually hit slightly better relative to the era he was playing in. A lot of people almost idealize how good Francisco Lindor was with the Guardians because he was playing in that juiced ball era, right? So home runs were just flying like crazy. I think a good example is I actually have the numbers up right here in front of me. 2017, 33 home runs, 116 OPS plus, right? His OPS was 842. This year, 828 OPS. Slightly worse, right? 27 home runs. He's probably not going to hit 33 at this point. His OPS plus, 134. 28 points better. He's playing in a time period. What's up, Wavy? Nice to see you. He's playing in a time period where offense is down actually league-wide, right? We've talked a lot about balls being dead this year, but he's still performing very well. He's still performing even close to that level from 2017. Guys don't exist in vacuums, right? You play in the era you play in. For example, during the steroid era, there were a number of guys, like Griffey's a great example of a guy who put up inhuman numbers that in almost any other era would have equaled a 200 OPS. But because he was playing in that steroid era, he never actually had an OPS plus above 180. I don't think he ever got to 180. So for Lindor, you can't fault him having a slight offensive drop-off since his heyday with the Guardians because the league overall has gone down, right? He's made good swing decisions. One of the things we've actually seen is, since 2020, he's actually hit the ball harder on a rate basis than he did with the Guardians. His average exit velo's gone up, his barrel rate's gone up, all those numbers have gone up. What's up, everybody? Welcome in. Today, right now, we're going to be talking about Francisco Lindor. Was he better with the Mets or the Guardians? As I said before, I think he's actually been better with the Mets than with the Guardians. Even though his numbers in some ways offensively have actually gone down slightly, the league-wide offensive environment has gone much lower than it was during his heyday with the Guardians, right? He had 38 home runs one year. That was, again, with the 132 OPS plus. For those of you guys who don't know, OPS plus essentially takes every offensive factor and then puts it up against the league average, right? So, for example, he had a 132 in 2019, or I'm sorry, in 2018 when he hit 38 home runs. This year, when he's at 27 home runs, his OPS is like about 50 points lower. His OPS plus is 134. It's actually 2 points better. And that's because league-wide offense is down. And he's managed to outperform what the league has done to that level. Now, I'm not saying OPS plus is a perfect stat. WAR isn't a perfect stat. He's had about the same WAR per 162 games with the Mets and the Guardians. But I do think relative to the era that he's playing in, he has been slightly better with the Mets. On top of that, his defense has been insane. Again, along with the level of the Guardians. But again, I think he means more to that Mets team, which is part of the reason that I would say he's actually been better with the Mets overall. He's had to be a leader. He's effectively been a leader. And he's also been an extremely proficient base runner. He's 30-30 last year. He's going to be 30-30 this year, more than likely. He never had a 30-30 season with the Guardians. The most stolen bases he actually had with the team was 25, and that's when he got caught 10 times. Now, over the last 2 seasons, his stolen base percentage has been off the charts. He's only been caught 8 times in the last 2 years with 56 stolen bases. So I do think Francisco Lindor has been better with the Mets than with the Guardians. I hope his legacy ends up reflecting that. I think if he doesn't end up having any serious postseason runs with them, people are going to have a hard time believing that, right? And that kind of sucks because it's not necessarily all his fault, right? Obviously, he does, as a leader on this team, have a role in getting them to the playoffs, but you can't do much more than throwing up a 6.5 WAR as a shortstop to help your team get there. Well, yeah, I know. So Jonathan Knoll says that he thinks that his time with the Guardians was better because he went to the series. I get that, but he was surrounded by pieces that were overall better. It wasn't just him that got them to the series. In fact, in 2016, when he got to the series with them, his overall contributions to the team were fairly marginal in comparison to what he would do over the next couple seasons. I mean, yeah, and again, if he manages to get to the playoffs and has a deep run with the Mets, I do think this is going to be a bit of a non-starter. People are going to see him as being a Met for life. They're going to see him as being an iconic Met. But even if he doesn't get there, I still think he's been better with the Mets, even though he hasn't even made an all-star team with them, which I think is utterly ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. Yeah, the 2022 Mets was a bit disappointing, BC. I do agree. I think they could have made a deeper postseason run than they ended up making. But I mean, again, like, how much that can you throw on him, right? Obviously, he was a huge leader on that team. Yeah, he's the spark for the organization. I think he's, in some ways, I don't even know if spark's the right term, because he's not that flashy of a player. It's almost like he's their rock, I think would be a great way to describe it, right? He's their rock. When it comes down to it, he's the guy they're going to turn to in clutch situations, and he's the guy who's going to always be able to go up the middle, deep into the hole, whatever, and make the play. In clutch situations, in regular situations, he's always showing up for them. All right, so we're going to go on to our next topic now, and that is a big one that's, in my opinion, kind of weighing very heavily on the overall concept of the season right now, the overall arc of the season, which is Matt Olson washed? Now, he's had the worst full season of his career so far, since he started playing in 2017. Right now, he has a career low in OPS in a full season at 746. I didn't know it gotten that bad. 105 OPS plus. I mean, there's a lot of second baseman shortstops that are posting better than that. And again, he's not the best fielder even at first base. So it's not even coming close to cutting it. He's got less than half of the home runs he had last year. And the bigger question, in my opinion, isn't even all of those counting numbers, right? A lot of the Atlanta Braves guys have gotten unlucky. Their expected sluggings are down. Their expected batting averages are down. The team actually right now should have a slugging percentage about 50 points higher than they currently have. That's largely due to the whole dead ball era. The whole dead ball era conversation. However, Matt Olson's one of those guys that, while he has been adversely affected by it, not nearly as extremely as some of these other guys, man. Like right now, he has the lowest exit velocity in a full season of his career at 91.2. He has the lowest max exit velocity of his career at 107.8. His launch angle is actually, his average exit velocity is the worst in his career at 91.3. His max exit velocity is the worst in 3 years at 113.9. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong column. His launch angle, this is the number one thing that's kind of concerning to me though. His launch angle is the worst in his career. He's hitting balls on the ground at a higher rate than he ever has. And hey, listen, I love line drives, but line drives for Matt Olson probably aren't as effective as well-hit fly balls, right? Because again, same thing, where it's like a line drive to the gap for him is at most a double, and sometimes it's even going to be a single because he's extremely slow. A well-hit fly ball pulled to right field, pulled to right center field, left center field, that's going to be the most effective kind of hit for Matt Olson, translating to something that's going to be solid for his player profile, right? His hard hit percentage is down, his K percentage is up marginally, his expected slugging is way down, his expected batting average is down, everything about him is down. And the number one most concerning stat, beside the one that I said, so I guess number two overall, is his barrels per plate appearance, the lowest in his career so far. The guy has to start making more optimal contact. He has to stop hitting so many ground balls if he wants to get back to where he was. Now, with that being said, his percentiles overall, right? So his average exit velocity, his barrel percentage, his hard hit percentage, they're all still around the 80th percentile. He can still be an effective player. He can still be a productive player, especially again at first base in a ballpark like Truist. He can still be an effective player, but he's going to need to start hitting fly balls and line drives on a more optimal angle and stop hitting so many ground balls. Another factor in this is his squared up percentage. So essentially what a squared up percentage is how well you're hitting the ball relative to how well you're expected to hit the ball, right? That's a very simple summation of it, but I think it suffices in this case. His squared up percentage this year is 18.4%. That's in the second percentile. Second percentile. You just can't get by with that, especially as a power hitting first baseman. Again, I do think he's going to be able to rebound. I think next year he'll be much better than he was this year, but I don't know if we'll ever see the 2023 Matt Olson again. That was a very special time for him, and he had a very special combination that year of specifically hitting the ball hard and hitting the ball in the air. Will he do that again? I don't know. However, I don't think he's washed per se. I think he has a good chance to make a comeback from this, but he's going to need to adjust that swing a little bit to start pulling fly balls to right field a little bit more, start pulling fly balls to left center, right center, stop hitting so many ground balls. And, if he cuts into his line drive percentage a little bit, I think he's got a solid chance still to be a very productive player. All right. And our last one. So this is our last thing we're going to be addressing, essentially before we get into the conversation of you giving me 2 Hall of Famers and me saying which is better. That's going to be, can Rich Hill actually be effective again? So a lot of people are going to say no, right? He's 44. He had a terrible season last year. The year before that was like okay, but it wasn't great. Why would he have a chance to have a decent end of the season this year, maybe even play next year, if he's trending in the wrong direction, right? This is why, in my opinion. I think that Rich Hill, the biggest issue that he had last year wasn't something like velocity. His velocity didn't go down really relative to the year before. It wasn't his movement profile. That really didn't go down relative to the year before either. It wasn't even his swing and miss percentage. His whiff percentage on his curveball last year, which is his primary pitch to get outs, was actually slightly higher than in 2022. And in line with his numbers, even from like 2020. In line with his numbers from, basically every year prior to 2022. It's relatively similar, right? A little bit down, but relatively similar. What really was different last year was he stopped locating his curveball as effectively. If you look at his heat map of where that curveball is landing, it was landing in the middle of the zone way, way too much relative to years past. That resulted in him giving up an XBA of 290, an expected slugging of 472, an expected WOBA of 367. All those are career highs in his curveball, of course, when he was a starter. And on top of that, too, it's the first time he's ever given up a slugging percentage over 400 on that curveball in a full season. If he can locate that pitch more effectively, which again, he throws the curveball 25-30% of the time, I think he can effectively play off of his currently still, again, pretty flaccid fastball. But again, he's never had a really good fastball. He can play off of that and actually get to a place where he can continue to contribute at the major league level. Again, at least relative to what the Red Sox are expecting. I don't think they're expecting anything lower than like a 4.5 ERA. Maybe like a 3.8 would blow them away. I think he can do that if he can more effectively locate his curveball. The cutter mix has been going up in recent years. The cutter last year was a fine pitch form. It wasn't great. But I think if he can more effectively locate his curveball, he'll have a much better time getting batters out for this year, and if he wants to continue on into next year. He's got one of those skill sets that could age well enough he could pitch, I think, into his 50s. I mean, again, if he's throwing 86 in 3 years, it's not really much different than him throwing 87, 88, right? Alrighty, and now we're on to our main topic. That's about 15 minutes. Generally, that's what I'm going to do when I'm going over current topics in this format, right? In the MLB deep dive format. Right now, I do want to say, before we continue on, if you guys want to drop a like on the live, it's always appreciated. We're at 10 likes, trying to get to 20. Also, any donations are always appreciated as well. If you do want to donate, I'll shout you out immediately by name, and I'll also read whatever your 2 players are immediately, because if you support me, I want to support you too. Thank you so much. Let's get into it. Who we got first? Bagwell or Biggio? Definitely Bagwell. Bagwell is one of the most underrated dominant hitters that I've ever seen. Again, he played in the steroid era, right? In some ways, he was a little bit less appealing than somebody like a Bonds or a Sosa or a McGuire, because he wasn't up to the level in terms of like pure home runs, right? He wasn't 55 plus home runs, stuff like that. But when it comes down to it, he literally had a near 200 OPS plus, if not a little over a 200 OPS plus season. Crazy, crazy stuff. He was one of the best running first basemen in Major League Baseball history, and the only thing that really holds him back from having more of a legacy, in my opinion, besides the steroid stuff, is the fact he didn't get to play for nearly as long. So I would definitely take Bagwell there. Griffey Jr. or Ruth? Well, relative to their era, Griffey Jr. was a better baseball player. Relative to their era, Ruth was a better baseball player than Griffey Jr. Again, it's like, you can have an argument over who's going to be the better player if they both started playing in 2024. I think probably it would be Griffey, right? But Babe Ruth literally set the standard for what greatness was in not only in Major League Baseball, but really in American sports around the turn of the century. It's so hard to overtake that legacy. We're talking about a guy like Bonds or even a guy like Mays for his overall contributions. As much as I love Griffey doesn't have half the WAR of Babe Ruth, if I'm not mistaken. If he does, it's just a little over half the WAR Babe Ruth had. So I would say Babe Ruth there over Griffey. Tino Martinez and Joe Mauer. That's a good one. I like that. I think Joe Mauer was so valuable as a catcher during his peak. I mean, we're talking about a guy who won 3 batting titles in his peak. When an American League catcher, I don't believe, had ever won a batting title before. What's up, Mighty Pat? So I would take Joe Mauer there. As much as I love Tino Martinez, he's not quite up to that level. I think you might have been Edgar Martinez. Even Edgar Martinez, as much as I like him, he was not even up to the level of like a David Ortiz. So not as valuable positionally relative to the other guys that have existed in a DH sense. We got next here. Richie Ashburn or Max Carey? Those are some old dudes. I would take Richie Ashburn there, though. Hall of Famer, like really just had an incredible legacy, specifically as an outfielder. I would take Richie Ashburn. Bob Gibson or Steve Carlton. That's a good one. Now, Steve pitched for longer, but Gibson was much more dominant relative to his era. Even with the whole pitching revolution around, the late 60s, he still was really dominant relative to his era. He actually has an ERA plus that's close to, if not identical to, if I'm not mistaken, to Pedro Martinez. One of the best pitchers of all time on a rate basis. I would give it to Bob Gibson. What if they made the Hall of Fame? Mark McGwire or Sosa? Yeah, I think both of those guys probably should be in the Hall of Fame. I know that the whole steroid thing, I get why they're not, but even relative to other steroid guys, they were blowing them away. So, but outside of that, Sosa or McGwire, I think that you have to give Sosa just for being an outfielder who could actually field at times in his career. McGwire being a terrible fielding first baseman kind of holds him back in the value department. You can even see that in the fact that Sosa won an MVP and McGwire didn't, even if McGwire may have deserved to win an MVP at some point in his career for some of his immense contributions in the batter's box. I would probably give it to Sosa. Sosa has more career home runs, pretty much he has more career everything because he played longer as well. So I would give it to Sosa there. Mike Schmidt or George Brett? I would say Mike Schmidt. As much as I love George Brett, I've never been very partial to guys who are singles and doubles hitters in lieu of a guy who can hit almost 600 career home runs as a third baseman while winning so many Gold Gloves. He was obviously a better fielder than Brett was. And at the plate, I think he was overall a more productive hitter, even if he wasn't quite as impressive batting average-wise. Willie Mays or Ken Griffey Jr.? Bonus question, do you think Mays is the greatest player of all time? So between Mays and Ken Griffey Jr., we can argue peaks, right? Overall, it's Mays by a pretty significant margin. He has like the second most career WAR of all time, if I'm not mistaken. Griffey's not even in the top 15. So career-wise, I would say it's Mays. Peak-wise, a little bit closer, still would take Mays. 50 home runs from a center fielder who won 10 straight Gold Gloves. Give me Willie Mays there. Do I think that Willie Mays is the greatest player of all time? Overall, I think he has a really good case. I'm always careful to crown greatest players of all time just because the actual analysis is so difficult because you have to put it relative to their era as well as relative to other players. I probably think Babe Ruth is the greatest player of all time. You can have an argument as well for Barry Bonds. The steroid stuff to me muddles it a little bit. I would say Babe Ruth is probably the best player of all time, but Willie Mays is top 3. And personally, Willie Mays has been my favorite player for a long time, so no disrespect to him. Chipper or Beltre? Ooh, Chipper or Beltre. I like that one a lot. I personally would probably take Beltre there, as Chipper had the more productive peak, I would say. Even if Beltre had a really good run in his late 30s, Chipper was literally throwing up 40 home run seasons as a third baseman while also playing Gold Glove defense, right? But I do think that Adrian Beltre's consistency throughout the course of his career, literally getting to over 3,100 career hits, an incredible amount of doubles, close to 600 career doubles, if I'm not mistaken, if not over 600 career doubles. I think that kind of takes the cake. He almost 500 career home runs as well. Chipper was great, but he didn't play for as long. Overall, he just wasn't able to throw up quite the numbers that Beltre was over the period that Beltre was able to. On top of that, Beltre might be the best new age fielder in Major League Baseball history. Most DRS ever. Got shafted for so many Gold Gloves. Austin McPherson, the $2 donation. Thank you so much, man. We have Robin Yount or Ryne Sandberg. Ooh, that's a good one. I would probably take Robin Yount there. Yount performed very well up the middle at shortstop, a more valuable defensive position for so long. And while Ryne Sandberg probably is the best power hitting second baseman of his era, I just don't think that's quite as valuable as Yount's just dynamic ability up the middle. Thank you so much for the $2 donation. That's a good time to remind you guys, if you guys do want to consider donating, it's the best way to help support the stream, best way to help support the podcast overall. If you do want to do so, I'll shout you out by name, and I'll also read your 2 players immediately. Because you support me, I want to support you too. I also want to encourage, if you do want to drop a like on the video, it always helps. Trying to get to 30 likes. Thank you so much. Anthony Rose, the $2 donation, asks, Mike Piazza or Johnny Bench? That's a great one. When it comes down to it, Johnny Bench has a resume as one of the greatest defensive catchers of all time. That, to me, takes him a little over the edge for someone like Piazza. As much as I do love Piazza, and Piazza is probably the greatest pure hitting catcher of all time, he literally hit like a first baseman, and the dude was a catcher. However, Johnny Bench was very similar hitting-wise, or at least like on the same level, and he was known as basically the best defensive catcher of all time until we got to the era of Pudge and Molina, right? There aren't advanced statistics that can really tell us a lot about his defensive capabilities, but we know at least colloquially that's how he was known, right? He won a ton of Gold Gloves, was a huge cog in the Big Red Machine back in the 1970s. I would have to take Johnny Bench there. Thank you so much for the $2 donation. Barry Bonds or Roy Halladay, totally separate guys, but I do appreciate the suggestion. I would take Barry Bonds there all day long. I love Roy Halladay, great pitcher, one of the best pitchers of his generation. Barry Bonds is literally like, was Mike Trout before Mike Trout was Mike Trout, and then with the roids became a prime Babe Ruth, but a little bit better for like 6 years. Derek Jeter or Ken Griffey Jr.? That's a good one, because positionally, Jeter was probably slightly more valuable as a shortstop than Griffey as a center fielder. Griffey was still extremely valuable as a center fielder. I would take Griffey just because his peak was so incredibly insane, and he was a more well-rounded player. He didn't do the most on the bases, but he was known league-wide as a good base runner, and was one of the best fielding center fielders of all time, to go with one of the best hitting peaks of all time as well. I would take Griffey Jr. there. Whitey Ford or Bob Feller? I like that one. Bob Feller pitched for a lot longer, more effectively. I would give it to Bob Feller there. Although Whitey Ford is one of the greatest, like, semi-short careers in Major League Baseball history, especially when you consider what he was able to do in the postseason. So no shade to Whitey Ford, but I would take Bob Feller there. Roy Halladay or Todd Helton? Kind of random. I think what Helton was able to do at first base is insane. It deserves appreciation. He deserved to be, in my opinion, a first ballot Hall of Famer, but he ended up getting to the Hall, so that's good at least. But Roy Halladay was more valuable as a starting pitcher than I think Todd Helton was as a first baseman, specifically in Coors. So I would take Roy Halladay there. Kind of hard to compare guys that are so dissimilar in terms of their positions, but I think I would probably take Roy Halladay there. I'd rather have him as my one in my rotation, prime Roy Halladay, for a 5 to 10 year stretch than Todd Helton in the middle of my lineup for a 5 to 10 year stretch. Randy Johnson or Nolan Ryan? Ryan was definitely robbed of Cy Youngs. I do agree with you on that. However, Randy Johnson had probably the best peak ever when it comes to an NL pitcher from 1998 to about 2002. You can argue Sandy Koufax was in there as well, but in my opinion, it has to go to Randy, especially when you consider what he did at the height of the steroid era. He had some insane postseason highlights as well. He's my favorite pitcher of all time, but I also do think he pretty much laps Ryan when you look at those advanced numbers, something like an ERA plus, something like even like a FIP. As much as I do, again, love Ryan, he had massive control issues, wild pitch issues. And yes, he was robbed of a Cy Young at least once in his career. But Johnson's probably the best left-handed starter of all time. Right up that, well, best retired left-handed starter. I think Kershaw could end up taking that title when all is said and done. But as for right now, I would give it to Randy Johnson. Jim Edmonds or Rickey Henderson? Ooh, kind of a random comparison. I really like it, though. Rickey Henderson is definitely better. I love Rickey Henderson. Rickey Henderson, I mean, people think about Rickey Henderson as a one-trick pony with his stolen bases, or maybe a two-trick pony with his stolen bases and walk ability. But the dude had solid pop, especially for a leadoff guy. Has the all-time record for home runs to lead off a game. And you can't underestimate his overall on-base ability. Again, the walks were great, but he also did have a solid approach at the plate. His career OPS plus is very good, especially for a left fielder. He won a Gold Glove. He was seen as a good left fielder. And his career WAR is 111. I think that's top 5 among left fielders. Probably is top 3 among left fielders. Might be in the top 2. But regardless, it's truly insane. As much as I love Jim Edmonds, and I think Jim Edmonds should be a Hall of Famer, he's not on the same level as Rickey, right? Rickey was a first ballot, easy Hall of Famer. Jim Edmonds didn't end up even making it to the Hall. We got next here. Ozzie Smith or Bill Mazeroski? That's a funny one. I like that. Bill played in an era where defense was probably valued even more than Ozzie did. I would probably give it to Ozzie, though, just because he played so long. Bill doesn't really belong in the Hall of Fame. It's pretty much for that walk-off home run that he hit to win the World Series is why he's actually there. I know he definitely had some great, highlights fielding-wise. Don't get me wrong when you look at his overall numbers, but, dude, Ozzie Smith did it for over 20 years. He still managed, even though he wasn't a good hitter, per se, he managed to throw up some of those counting numbers you need, and he stole, over 600 career bases. So he was a good base runner as well, to go on top with maybe the best fielding career of all time as a shortstop. So I would take Ozzie there. Jose Ramirez or Mike Trout? You know it's not legends. Yeah, it's not legends, but I think both guys probably will end up making the Hall of Fame. Specifically, if Ramirez can continue to play as he's been playing the last 3 years for the next, like, let's say 3 to 5 years, I think he could definitely have a very solid Hall of Fame case. Between those two, it's got to be Trout, easily first ballot slam dunk Hall of Famer. Although again, I do want to shout out the fact that Jose Ramirez is probably going to be a Hall of Famer as well. Roy Halladay or Jim Palmer? I would give it to Halladay. Jim Palmer was great, but he pitched in an era when guys weren't that overpowering, and he wasn't that overpowering. Halladay pitched in an era when there were some guys that were overpowering, but a lot of guys still, there wasn't that same emphasis on like Ks per nine, and he managed to be competitive in the sense of getting a lot of strikeouts, getting a lot of ground balls, before that was even necessarily cool. The ground ball thing was cool, but the strikeouts weren't necessarily at that time period. He also was one of baseball's last true great workhorse starting pitchers. I think what he did relative to his era was probably a little more impressive than what Jim Palmer did relative to his era. Not Hall of Fame, but Gagne or Bobby Thigpen. Thigpen. I would give it to Gagne. Gagne had an incredible peak, a Hall of Fame level peak. He didn't end up making it to the Hall because it wasn't long enough, but he had a Hall of Fame level peak. I'd give it to Gagne there. Babe Ruth versus Albert Pujols. Babe Ruth, you know, as much as I, love Albert Pujols, and I think Albert Pujols is one of the greatest overall hitters in Major League Baseball history, with one of the greatest peaks in Major League Baseball history, Babe Ruth did it for longer, and he also redefined the sport in a fundamental way. Albert Pujols, for all of his accomplishments and all of his greatness, did not redefine the sport. In fact, if anything, he was semi-lagging behind a couple of those steroid guys, right? Like a Bonds, McGuire, Sosa, in terms of stature, when he was starting to get big in the early 2000s. So, and again, that wasn't fair because it doesn't seem like he ever did roids, but that's kind of the way that it was. He didn't redefine anything, but man, was he insane. Magglio Ordonez or J.D. Drew? Not Hall of Famers, but I appreciate that. Magglio Ordonez, I would say, overall was the more productive hitter for longer. So I would give it to Magglio there. Ricky Henderson or Sammy Sosa? Sammy Sosa hit way more home runs, but was overall a way less productive ball player. Again, Ricky Henderson gets underrated for the overall completeness of his game. Great fielder in left field, really solid, obviously amazing base runner, but really solid hitter, had some decent power moments. I'd give it to Ricky Henderson there all day long. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We're at 26 likes. If you guys do want to drop a like live, it's always appreciated. Also, if you do want to consider donating, it's the best way to help support the live, best way to help support the podcast overall. If you do want to donate, I'll shout you out by name immediately, and I'll also read your two players, no matter what I'm talking about, because you support me, I want to support you too. Thank you so much. Let's get back to it. What we got next here? Randy versus Pedro. That's a tough one. So, peak-wise, it probably has to go to Pedro. He's probably one of the only guys that had a better peak. But Pedro pitched 1,500 less innings than Randy did. Randy did it after getting good in his late 20s. If I had to choose one of them to have the whole career with me, I'd have to choose Randy. Because, I mean, he might have given me on a rate basis slightly worse numbers, but he did it for 1,500 more innings. That's, or at least maybe like 1,200 more innings. I'll give him that. Maybe like 1,200 more innings. But still, an incredible difference. I would give it to Randy there from that perspective. Bagwell or Helton? Ooh, that's a good one. I would probably give it to Bagwell overall just because he was actually a bit more powerful as a hitter than Helton. Helton, towards the end of his career, moved into more of a line drive approach, which worked really well for him. He got on base a ton as well, especially in like a Coors Field. But Jeff Bagwell was an insanely productive hitter power-wise throughout the course of his career. One of the best base runners of all time, and if I'm not mistaken, a pretty decent fielder at first base. The only thing that keeps Jeff Bagwell from being considered an inner circle Hall of Famer, even though he is a Hall of Famer, is the fact he didn't get to play for very long. So I would give it to Bagwell there. Kirby Puckett or Joe Mauer? I like the comparison. I think Joe Mauer was more valuable as a catcher than Kirby Puckett was as an outfielder. Both careers got cut short due to injuries. I probably would rather have Prime Mauer than Prime Puckett. Though, again, no one disrespect Prime Puckett. He was so good, man. He retired way too early, unfortunately, due to his eye condition. But regardless, I would probably take Mauer there. Hank Aaron or A-Rod? Ooh, okay, so if we're considering steroids as a non-factor here, it's a little closer. However, Hank Aaron has one of the best WARs overall for his career of all time. On top of that, he was a solid base runner. He was a great on base hitter, as well as having, basically the most consistent power stroke of all time outside of steroid guys. I would give it to Hank Aaron there. Anthony Rolls, thank you so much for the $2 donation. We have 3 pitchers and hitters I think will make it into the Hall. I'm assuming you think are active. So I think Aaron Judge is going to make it to the Hall of Fame. I think Mike Trout is going to make it into the Hall of Fame. And I think Francisco Lindor has an inside track to make it into the Hall of Fame. 3 pitchers, I would say right now it's incredibly hard to name pitchers. I think Kimbrel has a chance if he can throw up 500 career saves. I don't know if that's going to happen. Kimbrel does have a chance, though, just because he is getting close to that. Same thing for Jansen. And then I think Garrett Cole has a pretty decent chance. Besides the gimme guys, right, which are Verlander and Scherzer. Those guys are gimmies. Same thing for Kershaw. The more interesting answers, I would say, are probably Garrett Cole. And then, yeah, on the threshold right now, we got Kimbrel and Jansen if they can get more saves. Thank you so much for the $2 donation. Thank you so much for your participation in the live so far. Griffey or the late Willie Mays? I answered this one earlier, and this one again. I think Willie Mays is one of the greatest, like a top 3 greatest player of all time. For that reason, I would say Willie Mays. Verlander or Kershaw? I like that one. I think people underestimate how good Kershaw's peak was. You could have a conversation of Kershaw or Pedro, right? The Kershaw or Verlander argument. Verlander has been so good for so long. I get that. His peak, insane. From about 2017 through about 2019. And then he also had a peak from 2011 through 2013, which is crazy. 2010 through 2013, right? Crazy. Maybe even 2009, you can argue it started as well. So 2 separate insane peaks. However, when you look at his overall career numbers, he has a lower career ERA plus than Shohei Ohtani. I'm not saying that to diss Verlander or to emphasize Shohei Ohtani. But, Kershaw's better than that by 20-some points. Best career ERA plus actually since integration. You're comparing like one of the greatest pitchers of all time, maybe the greatest pitcher of all time relative to their era, with the guy who's one of the best pitchers of his generation, if not the best pitcher of his generation. I would give it to Kershaw personally. We have Zealous Renton 102 with a $5 donation. Thank you so much, my man. Roger Clemens or Randy Johnson? So the steroid thing is obviously the elephant in the room. Thank you so much again for the donation, by the way. But the steroid thing is the big one in the room, right? However, I don't think it necessarily has to be. I would still take Randy Johnson. I know that Roger Clemens had a slightly better career ERA plus. I was just talking about that as a huge factor. When guys are closer, I don't consider it as much. But the steroids are a bit of a thing for me when we come down to breaking ties like that. And I think that Randy Johnson's career, not only in the postseason, but also just his peak, again, from 1998 to 2002, breaks the tie for me because, again, it is fairly close. I would give it to Randy Johnson. Greatest lefty of all time, in my opinion, right? Amongst guys who aren't yet retired. Barry Bonds and modern-day Aaron Judge. So this might surprise some people, right? If we're going throwing morals out the door, I still would have to take Barry Bonds. Just because 600 OBP in a season, 800 slugging. Those numbers will probably never, ever be seen again, right? As much as Judge is doing this year, he might even get close to a 500 OBP. A 600 is insane and not really achievable at this point. I would have to take him if we're not considering roids. However, because it is somehow fairly close when we're looking at peak for what Judge has done from 2022 to today, I would rather have Judge on my team. I think he's a better leader. I think he's a better clubhouse presence overall. I think that he's a more unselfish player. So, in a cold, isolated numerical sense, it'd have to be Bonds. With everything else considered, it would be Judge. Thank you so much for the participation. Sorry about that. Walter Johnson or Greg Maddux? Johnson was really dominant relative to his era, but if I'm being honest with you, I don't consider pitchers before roughly 1950 to be in the same league as guys since then, because the game was completely different. Yeah, was he good relative to his other pitchers? Yes, but he was throwing spitballs, dirt balls. He was throwing balls at 4:50 p.m. when the sun was starting to go down, when the ball was all muddied up, and you couldn't really see it anymore. You can't really compare guys from those eras. So with what Maddux managed to do at the height of the steroid era, I probably would give it to Maddux. Even though, again, Johnson may have some of those superior rate numbers, but completely different eras. Hard to compare guys. Give me the known quantity of Greg Maddux in the modern era. Prime Trout versus Prime Griffey. They're actually semi-similar. Griffey probably was a little bit better peak hitting wise than Trout, but Trout stole more bases, was overall faster. Griffey was better defensively. That's tough, man, because again, you have to consider relative to their eras, right? Trout's OPS plus is pretty significantly better than Griffey's at the peaks of their careers, just because Griffey played at a time with the steroid guys. But that's not Griffey's fault, right? I would probably rather have Griffey by a nose hair. When all is said and done, Trout might end up having a higher career WAR, which is crazy because both have dealt with massive injury issues. But Trout, arguably even more than Griffey. He might not end up getting to play nearly as many games as him. But if we're talking peak, probably Griffey by a nose hair. Tom Seaver or Tom Glavine, the Tomboys. I love Tom Glavine. I think Tom Glavine was, in a way, like a toss back to an older era, even when he was pitching, right? An 84-mile-an-hour throwing lefty who's actually managed to be effective for a long time, which is very impressive. But Tom Seaver was the consummate best pitcher of his generation overall. Give me Tom Seaver there. Miggy or Judge? Judge is better than Miguel Cabrera. Even Miguel Cabrera at his prime, Judge is better than Miguel Cabrera. And Miguel Cabrera also plays the outfield and plays it decently. In right field, he's great. In center field, he hasn't been nearly as good as he was in right field, but he's still passable. Not at all the same story for Miguel Cabrera, who's a terrible third baseman and a mediocre first baseman. Al Kerrigan 99, thank you so much for the £5 donation. Mickey Mantle or Carl Yastrzemski? I like that. It has to go to Mickey Mantle. Played center field. Apparently, according to a lot of people, he played it pretty well. And he's one of the greatest rate hitters of all time. He actually had an over 200 OPS plus season. He was amazing. He didn't have the highest batting average relative to some of the other guys in his era, but he was one of the most consistent power hitters. And like I said, he still did play center field, even if he didn't play it all that well. Yastrzemski was amazing again, and one of the best players of his generation, one of the best right fielders of all time, or left fielder. Actually, he could have played right or left. I think he played left, actually. One of the best left fielders of all time, but not quite to the same level as Mantle. I would take Mantle, especially also with what he was able to contribute to the postseason exploits of the Yankees, the prime Yankees. Thank you so much for the donation as well. Randy Johnson or Greg Maddux? Ooh, I was wondering when somebody would throw this one out there. So, Greg Maddux pitched for a long time. He threw way more innings than Johnson, which is crazy because Johnson threw so many innings. But he threw way more innings than Johnson, which overall I think hurts him a little bit when you look at his rate numbers, right? Towards the latter half of his career, was not nearly as effective as he was in the beginning half of his career. But I would say the effectiveness of Randy Johnson and the fact that they pitched at least like not an insanely different amount of innings pitched, I would probably rather have Randy Johnson, who again I think is probably the best lefty pitcher of all time amongst guys who are retired. I probably would prefer him by a little bit over the abject genius of Greg Maddux. Although again, it is fairly close. Thank you so much for the participation. Al Kaline or Eddie Matthews? Interesting comparison. I think Eddie Matthews was a more valuable third baseman relative to his position than Al Kaline was. So, yeah, I think that I would probably give it to Eddie Matthews there. Over 500 career home runs as a third baseman is nuts. I believe almost 600 career home runs as a third baseman. And he was known as a really good fielder as well. So I'd say that's a little bit more valuable than Kaline, who still seems a really good outfielder for the Tigers and a very overall good hitter, but not quite up to the level power-wise as somebody like Matthews. Thank you, Mighty Pat. Appreciate it, man. Said have a nice day. Have a nice day yourself. Ruth or Ohtani? Okay, so Shohei Ohtani, what he's managing to do in the modern era is redefining Major League Baseball. What Babe Ruth did back in the early 1900s, back in the 1920s, redefined Major League Baseball. So I guess I can understand the comparison. However, Shohei Ohtani is your one pitcher. He's one of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball when he's healthy. And he's your 3 or 4 hitter, right? He's 2 for the Dodgers, but he could be your 3 or 4 hitter. That's how valuable of a hitter he is. I think he's redefining how baseball can be played on a more consequential level than even Babe Ruth, right? Babe Ruth changed the way that offense essentially was valued, but Shohei Ohtani is changing the framework of how guys could play the game. For that reason, I think Shohei Ohtani is going to end up being more impactful, at least in a game strategy sense. However, the legacy of Babe Ruth looms large. He's one of the most known athletes of all time. So Shohei Ohtani, his impact cannot be overstated or understated. However, he has to do more, I think, to pass Babe Ruth, at least in terms of legacy at this point. Johan Santana or Tim Lincecum, who's better peak-wise? I would give it to Johan just because Johan had like a 6 or 7 year stretch of dominance, whereas Timmy Jam had more like a 4-year stretch of dominance. So, and what Johan did back then was truly insane. He definitely deserved a couple Cy Youngs in there, on top of even what he did end up winning. So I would give it to Johan there. Arenado or Machado, 2 future Hall of Famers in my opinion. I think that when all is said and done, Nolan Arenado will be seen as the more overall productive player. He's a better fielder, and hitting-wise, they're fairly comparable, right? So I would definitely default to Nolan Arenado, even though he did. I know he played a couple years there in Coors, like a huge portion of his career in Coors. That definitely muddies his legacy a little bit. In my opinion, it doesn't overall diminish it that much, especially when you consider some of the character issues that Machado has had in his career. Anti-Banner with a $5 donation. Thank you so much, my man. Felix Hernandez or Corey Kluber? That's an interesting one. So Corey Kluber had a great peak, but the first 11 or 12 years of Felix Hernandez's career were abject Hall of Fame territory. Corey Kluber, from 2014 through 2018, 2019 was amazing. But that's a little over half the time that he was effective for. I would have to, for that reason, give it to Felix Hernandez. I think Felix Hernandez is one of the greatest peaks we've ever seen, especially in the modern era. So I would give it to Felix Hernandez. Didn't get the love that he really deserved at the time he was pitching, just because he played in a consistently crappy team, especially offensive-wise. Can I just stop and say real quick how incredibly insane it is that we're still talking about the Mariners' offensive struggles? We were talking about that in 2009, 2010. Why is that still an issue? Regardless, I would take Felix Hernandez there. Current DH Ohtani or Prime Ichiro? DH Ohtani. I love Prime Ichiro. Prime Ichiro was literally like a 7-WAR player. He had a 9-WAR one season as well. He was insane. He was great. But Shohei Ohtani, even as a hitter, is going to lap him in value most years because he's literally throwing up an over 180 OPS plus per season, and now at this point stealing close to 50, if not over 50 bases. What a complete overall player. He basically has a speed on the same level as Ichiro, while almost doubling, if not over doubling, his production at the plate. Yes, he doesn't field, but I value insane level hitting over really great fielding, in my personal opinion. So I would take Prime Ichiro, I would take Ohtani, what he's doing right now as a DH, over Ichiro by a nose hair. We have Avery Sanford with the $2 donation. Thank you so much. Prime Bautista versus Prime Encarnacion. That's a great one. I really like that one. I think that Prime Bautista hit over 50 home runs. He had an insane run from 2011 through 2014, 2013. Encarnacion did it longer, but you said peak, right? You said prime. Prime Bautista was better. On top of that, he played right field and he played it okay, right? Encarnacion was a pretty terrible third baseman and an okay, slightly below average first baseman. One of the worst overall DRS numbers, if I'm not mistaken, of his generation. I would give it to Jose Bautista there, peak-wise. Thank you so much for the donation. Thank you so much for the support, everybody. It's at this point I'll ask, if you guys don't mind, dropping a like on the stream. We're at 41 likes, trying to get to 50. Also, if you do want to consider donating, best way to help support the stream, best way to help support the podcast. We're at $26 donations right now. Trying to get to maybe 30 before the hour's out. I'll shout you out by name. I'll also read your take immediately. Thank you so much. Molina or Posey? People give me that a lot. I think both are Hall of Famers. I'd have to give it to Posey just because he was a game-changing 2 to 3 in your lineup on top of being one of the best defensive catchers of his era. A great measurement here is they have about the same WAR and for their careers, and Posey literally played, 6-7 years less, maybe 8 years less than Molina? As much as I do love Molina, I think he's a Hall of Famer. I would probably give it to Posey there. Jeter or Chipper Jones? I would have to give it to Jeter. Jeter was the most valuable postseason hitter of his generation, one of the most valuable postseason hitters of all time, one of the top 5 best hitting shortstops of all time. Yes, he was a terrible fielder. That's been established. But again, I value hitting, great hitting, game-changing hitting, difference-making hitting over really good defense, which Chipper definitely had at third base. I think Jeter was more valuable as a shortstop than Chipper was as a third baseman overall. Even their WARs, their career, if I'm not mistaken, overall reflect that, right? I think Jeter either is very close to him, if not slightly over Chipper. So I would give the Jeter there. Don't quote me on that. I could be wrong, but still. Eric Gagne 2003 versus Dennis Eckersley 1990. Eric Gagne 2003 might be the best relief pitcher of all time in terms of his overall dominance and efficiency as a relief pitcher. Because of that, I would give it to him. Anti-Banner, the $5 donation, didn't even throw anything in. It just said, you're the best. Thank you. Thank you, Anti-Banner. Thank you so much for the support on the stream. Really appreciate you. Really appreciate everybody who's willing to support, everybody who's willing to drop a like, everybody who's willing to donate. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. Piazza or Posey? This is a tough one because I know what I just said about Molina, right? And Piazza, again, he's basically the Molina of hitting, right, for catchers. However, I do value, like I said, I value game-changing hitting probably more than game-changing defense. Out of a catcher, it's a little different just because you really do need that game-changing defense from a catcher to have an effective team. Piazza was known as a fairly decent game caller, was not a good thrower, obviously. Kind of stark opposite of Molina in that respect. But this is versus Posey, and he played many more years than Posey. It's tough. I probably would have to give it to Piazza. Just again, I do value that game-changing offense a little bit more. And like I said, I think he overall has been overhated for his defense a little bit. I think that he was a good game caller, even if the throwing wasn't quite there. And he did it for so long. He basically was the first baseman as a catcher. I'd probably give it to Mike Piazza there. Frank Thomas or Ripken Jr.? Ripken Jr. Ripken Jr., dude, people underrate how good Ripken Jr. was. He had one of the best overall shortstop seasons in Major League Baseball history, if I'm not mistaken, in 1990, 1989, around there. And on top of that, I mean, you can't underrate going out there and performing every day as a shortstop with decent hitting and decent fielding. Like, he racked up over 100 career WAR. Ripken Jr. there. Gehrig or Mantle? Oh, that's a tough one because Gehrig played the more valuable defensive position, obviously. I'm sorry, Mantle played the most valuable defensive position, obviously, of the two. But Gehrig meant so much to the Yankees, and he was hitting basically at Babe Ruth's level for a while, at a time where pretty much almost nobody else in the league was hitting at Babe Ruth's level. So I probably would have to go Mantle there just because he did play a more valuable defensive position, and hitting-wise, they're relatively similar. I would have to take Mantle there by a little bit. And the fact that, unfortunately, Gehrig didn't get to play for nearly as long as Mantle got to play for, even though both dealt with both didn't deal with injuries. Gehrig dealt with a life-ending disease, and Mantle dealt with a lot of injuries. But regardless, I probably would take Mantle there by a nose hair. Ohtani only as a pitcher or Ohtani only as a hitter? That's a great one. Both are elite players. Both are some of the best players of their generation in their respective skill sets. However, Shohei Ohtani as a hitter is capable of throwing up a 180, 190 OPS plus while stealing you 50 bases in a season. And while playing pretty much every day, right? He can throw up 162 games as DH. He's not going to get hurt more than likely. He's in great shape. He takes good care of himself. I think he's going to have a lot of endurance specifically in that role. As a pitcher, we haven't seen him throw even over 190 innings yet in his career, right? So I would be very hesitant to take him as a number one starting pitcher for me and get 150 innings versus my 2, 3, 4 guy and give me 150 games worth of at-bats, 150 games worth of romps around the bases. I think Shohei Ohtani is a better hitter than pitcher, even though he's still elite at both. Thank you so much for the question. Derek Jeter or Troy Tulowitzki? Ooh, and then how much does winning affect this? Winning affects it somewhat just because, I mean, you can't throw out Derek Jeter's postseason legacy, right? I know that we could talk about their peaks, and Troy was definitely, at his peak, Troy was probably a more complete player than Derek Jeter, and we're considering how good his defense was. He had elite defense as a shortstop to go with his insane hitting. However, Derek Jeter had really good hitting as well, maybe not quite up to the level of peak Tulo, but he also was a really good base runner. And yes, the fielding was terrible, but he did it for so much longer, again, than Tulo did. Part of the reason his numbers are so bad is because he played for so long, specifically defensively at shortstop. So because of that, I would give it to Derek Jeter there. I don't think that we can say Tulo is on the same level as Jeter. Luis Ariz or Kyle Schwarber? That's not two Hall of Famers, but I will acknowledge just because I do like having this conversation. This year it's Schwarber. Funny enough, he's not hurting the team nearly as much anymore because he's a DH, and he's been performing really well hitting-wise. We're talking about 130 OPS plus, right? Ariz is not doing that well hitting-wise this year relative to last year. He's at like a 110 OPS plus. He's still, he's knocking the ball around a little bit. He's got an over 300 batting average, but he's terrible defensively, and he's still being allowed to hurt the team on a fairly routine basis in the field. So because of that, I'd go with Schwarber. Obviously, last season's incarnation of Luis Arraez, which was a much better fielder than this year and a much better overall complete hitter, would be better than I think pretty much any incarnation of Kyle Schwarber. But we're living in the now, and so because of that, I would give it to Schwarbs. Ty Cobb or Babe Ruth? I mean, two different players that defined their generations, best players basically of the generations. I would give it to Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth has the greater legacy. He redefined the game in a more profound way. And also Ty Cobb has the whole character thing, which, it's not necessarily a difference maker stats-wise, but it's a difference maker to me personally when I'm picking who I think is better, who is better overall for their teams specifically. Tony Gwynn or Wade Boggs? That's a pretty good one, man. I would give it to Wade Boggs. I mean, Wade Boggs has I think a top 5 best WAR all time for a third baseman. And they had very similar batting averages. They had very similar peaks when it comes to their OPS pluses. And then, Boggs was playing a more valuable position at third base than Tony Gwynn was in left field. But I think Boggs is one of the most underrated Hall of Famers of all time, in my opinion. Nobody talks about Wade Boggs as the best third baseman of all time or in the conversation for top 3, top 5. I don't think he's the best. I think Mike Schmidt's probably the best, but I think he should be considered top 5 and talked about more routinely than he currently is. At this time, I will ask you guys if you want to drop a like on the live. It's very much appreciated. We're at 48 likes, trying to get to 50 if you guys do want to drop that. Also, thank you so much for the donations. Trying to get to 40 if we can before the live ends. I'll probably give it another 10 minutes or so. And then from there, I'll sign off. Thank you so much. If you do want to drop a donation, I'll shout you out by name immediately. Also, take your 2 takes. Basically, it's a skip the line type thing. Thank you so much. Ohtani is a pitcher or Garrett Cole? Again, not 2 Hall of Famers. Arguably, you could say... Well, I would say, okay, both are Hall of Famers for different reasons. I think Garrett Cole is a Hall of Famer for his pitching resume. I think especially considered relative to his generation is going to be considered a Hall of Famer. Ohtani is going to be a Hall of Famer for what he did overall, not necessarily as a pitcher. If I had to pick between them, I would pick Garrett Cole just because he's so much more durable. He's going to give you 180, 190, 200 innings most years of exceptional number 1 starting rotation pitching production. Ohtani just doesn't have that level of reliability specifically with his health, even though his numbers compare semi-favorably to somebody like a Cole at his peak. But again, I need somebody who's going to be a little bit more durable if I'm trying to get a number 1 in my rotation. Brooks Robinson or Eddie Murray? I like that one. I like the callback to that really semi-archaic 1980s era, right? 1980s, 1970s era. Brooks Robinson, best fielding third baseman of all time, arguably, right? Probably best fielding third baseman of all time. If you go by Gold Gloves and stuff, and I know there wasn't advanced metrics and everything, but he has the stature as the best fielding third baseman of all time. Eddie Murray, while he was an amazing player, one of the best switch hitters of all time, is not considered one of the best first basemen of all time. So for that reason, I probably picked Brooks Robinson. Wasn't a fairly decent hitter, but again, that defense was game-changing for so many years. He meant so much to those Orioles teams. And yes, while I do value offense over defense, when we have somebody like Murray who didn't have offensive numbers that were truly unbelievably insane, and we do have somebody with truly unbelievably insane defensive numbers, I'd probably give it to Robinson there. Defense, excluding defense, you said Ichiro or Joey Votto. So this is the thing. I think we can include defense, and it's still a conversation. If we're excluding defense, it's obvious it'd be Joey Votto, right? I mean, offensive war-wise, Joey Votto pretty much beats Ichiro by almost every metric. Ichiro, while he was a really good hitter, don't get me wrong, was a slap hitter, and that's just not nearly as valuable as a guy who can get on base at a 400 clip. Ichiro wasn't getting on base past a 350 to 370 mark most years. A lot of people forget he didn't really walk at all. He was more valuable base runner and everything, but again, that's not really what we're talking about. Just purely hitting profiles. It would be Votto if it was pure hitting profiles. Overall, as Major League Baseball players, it would probably be Ichiro by a nose hair just because of what he was able to do on the bases and as an outfielder. But that's only specifically because Votto was a first baseman. And yes, again, I don't value defense as much as I value hitting, but game-changing defense in right and center field does kind of move the needle to me for Ichiro in comparison to somebody like Votto, who's playing first base and also didn't play for nearly as long as Ichiro did. So I would rather, I think, have Ichiro over the course of a 20-year career than Votto, just because Votto didn't have that level of endurance, didn't have that staying power, and also played first base. Sosa or McGuire? I answered this one earlier. Let's just one more time. I think it has to be Sosa just because of the longevity of his career and the fact that he had over 600 career home runs and played the outfield relative to McGuire playing a pretty poor first base. Tom Glavine or Mike Mussina? That's cool. I like that. Fairly similar pitchers in terms of their mold. Mussina had a bit more strikeout stuff. Glavine pitched for a longer period, if I'm not mistaken. I would probably take Mike Mussina there. I think Mussina was the more dominant overall pitcher relative to their era. And I think that he also was, I think he got underrated dramatically because he played on some teams that weren't as good as the teams that Glavin was on. But yeah, I'll probably take Mussina there. Glavin, again, got a little overrated just because he was on those insane Braves teams and won over 300 games. But he wasn't as good on a rate basis as Mussina, if I'm not mistaken. When it's all said and done, who's going to have the better career, Soto or Acuna Jr.? Soto is going to have, I think, the legacy of somebody like a modern era Ted Williams, right? I think he's going to have an over 400 career OBP. I think he's going to have a near 290 to perhaps even a 300 career batting average when all is said and done, when he really hits his peak and his stride. I think he's going to have over 500 career home runs. He might have over 600 career home runs. Acuna Jr.'s hurt both of his knees. That's taken away 2 years of his career, and he doesn't play a good right field. For that reason, I think he's going to be held back. Soto already doesn't play a good outfield, right? But he can move to DH and I think still be an incredibly effective player. I think if Acuna Jr. moved to DH, he wouldn't be as valuable as Soto, just because I don't think he can perform as well hitting-wise into his late 30s in the same way. I think he needs that dynamicism to be as effective a player as he can be. Soto doesn't need that as much. For that reason, I think Soto will probably have the greater overall legacy, but I could totally see Acuna Jr. coming back from his knee injury and redefining a bit how he's being perceived right now as kind of on the downturn. So it could end up being a bit, both guys are too young to really make an accurate prediction. I probably would bet on Soto if I had to bet. Jackie Robinson or Babe Ruth, importance to the game. Dude, Jackie Robinson definitely had more importance to the game. He is a civil rights hero on top of being a Hall of Fame, one of the best second basemen of all time, period. Babe Ruth redefined the game, but Jackie Robinson was worth way more to the game overall, right? It was more than a game what Jackie did in comparison to Babe Ruth. I would say Jackie Robinson there. Vladdy or Vladdy Sr.? Ooh, that's a good one, because you know what? Vladdy Sr. was seen as a fairly decent right fielder. When you look at the numbers, he was not a good fielding right fielder, so he was allowed to hurt the team out there. Vladdy Jr. is not allowed to hurt his team as much at first base, right? Vladdy Jr. is also off to a really great start in the annals of baseball history to his career. But you can't say he's better than Vladdy Sr. as of now. Vladdy Sr. had a 40-40 season, even if it wasn't the best on a rate basis running the bases. And on top of that, too, I mean, just completely pure offensively, he's still better than his son. Right now, over the course of his career, he still is better than his son. His son might end up throwing up 150, 160 OPS plus the next 5 to 10 years. At that point, he probably would be considered a little bit better than his dad. But as of right now, we can't say he is. I would say Vladimir Guerrero Sr. there. Ichiro or Clemente? Ooh, I like that one. I would give it to Clemente. I think Clemente was the better overall player. He was a better hitter than Ichiro, that's for sure. Probably was a better defender, which is crazy because both were crazy levels of defenders. Clemente was, I think, considered a better defender relative to his generation than Ichiro was. I would probably give it to him by a smidge because that, like I said, I do really value elite hitting. He was one of the most elite hitters as a right fielder in his generation. Had more power than Ichiro. Just an overall, I think, more complete player aside from the base running. We got next here. Ripken Jr. or Ripken Sr.? I would say Ripken Jr. Jeff Bagwell versus Craig Biggio. Answered that one earlier on this one again. Jeff Bagwell is one of the most underrated hitters relative to his generation of all time. For that reason, I would give it to Jeff Bagwell. Ohtani or Lindor for NL MVP this year? Again, not quite the prompt, but I'll answer it. Easily Shohei Ohtani. I love Francisco Lindor. I love what he's been able to do for the Mets this season. I think he's put them on his back in a way that I don't think it's possible for Ohtani to do just because the Dodgers have so many pieces. However, with that being said, we're talking about a 50-50 potential season here. Are we really going to say that Lindor's defense at shortstop makes up for a disparity of 20 home runs on both sides, a worse batting average by 30 to 40 points, a worse on-base percentage by 30 to 40 points, worse slugging percentage by like close to 100 points? I don't think so. Again, I really value hitting, man. I really value hitting. And I do think that makes up for everything that Lindor offers defensively as a shortstop. Again, I do love Lindor. He could end up having more WAR than Shohei. Right now he doesn't, but he could end up having more WAR than Shohei. But for that reason, I would give it to Shohei MVP this year if it ended today. Raleigh Fingers or Goose Gossage? I would say Raleigh Fingers. Raleigh Fingers had the Hall of Fame level career, right? I mean, I don't think Goose Gossage ended up even making the Hall of Fame. He was one of the most dominant, one of the first truly dominant closers in Major League Baseball history. That has to be appreciated, his historical impact. On top of the fact that he was truly dominant at his peak. Won a Cy Young. Give it to Raleigh Fingers. Ted Williams or Carlos Yastrzemski? Ted Williams is a top 3 hitter, top 5 hitter of all time. Maybe like he's in the conversation, maybe top 2, right? Terrible fielder, obviously, but Carlos Yastrzemski wasn't known as the greatest fielder of all time either in Fenway. So it has to be Ted Williams there. No disrespect to Carlos Yastrzemski, though, who again had an amazing, semi-underrated career in the annals of baseball history, but it has to go to Ted Williams there. All right, we're about to hit an hour, guys. Thank you so much for popping in for the recording of this podcast. This will end up going into my podcast that's currently on my YouTube channel. If you guys want to go back and revisit it. Thank you so much for coming in, everybody, today. Appreciate all the love. Appreciate the donations. 65 likes as well. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. Probably end up streaming tomorrow as well.